A homeless man finds a rich woman's diary. When he reads it, he discovers something that shocks him. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. On a frigid December morning in 1985, Ulysses Matthews huddled beneath the thin blanket that served as his only protection against Chicago's merciless winter. At 53, his weathered face and graying hair told the story of a man who had seen better days. The cardboard boxes he called home lined the entrance of an abandoned bookstore in the city's older district. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the urban canyon of skyscrapers, Ulysses noticed something unusual among the morning's garbage collection. A leather-bound book, its rich burgundy cover standing out against the grey concrete. The book had been discarded alongside several boxes of items from what appeared to be a recently cleared-out apartment. His fingers, numb from the cold, traced the elegant binding. Opening it revealed handwritten pages filled with neat, flowing script. It was a diary, and on the first page, in careful calligraphy, was written, "Property of Eva Richardson, 1980. Ulysses had always been a reader. Before life had taken its cruel turns, he'd been a high school English teacher. Now this diary offered a glimpse into another world, a respite from his harsh reality. He began to read. April 15th, 1980, today, I signed the final papers for Richardson Enterprises. Mother would be proud, though I doubt father ever imagined his company would end up in my hands. The board members barely concealed their disdain. A woman running a manufacturing empire. Henry Blackwood, our chief financial officer, looked particularly displeased, but father's will was clear. His only child would inherit everything. I'm terrified. I'm only 28, and suddenly I'm responsible for thousands of employees' livelihoods. What do I really know about running a company? The MBA from Yale seems inadequate now, but I have to prove them wrong. I have to. Ulysses found himself drawn into Eva's world. As he continued reading, he discovered entries that revealed a woman struggling to maintain her composure in a male-dominated business world, while harboring deep loneliness behind her powerful facade. The next entry made him sit up straighter. April 30th, 1980. The discrepancies in the books are worse than I feared. Henry's explanations don't add up. Something is very wrong at Richardson Enterprises, and I'm beginning to suspect it goes back years, perhaps even to when father was alive. But who can I trust? The board is filled with father's old friends, men who've known each other for decades. I'm the outsider here, despite my name being on the building. As Ulysses read on, his teacher's instinct for analysis kicked in. He began to notice patterns, references that seemed significant. Eva's elegant handwriting described business meetings, betrayals, and a growing sense of isolation. But it was the entry dated July 15th, 1980, that made his blood run cold. I found the proof today, hidden in a false bottom of father's old desk. Henry has been embezzling for years, millions siphoned through ghost accounts. Worse, I discovered why father really died. It wasn't a heart attack. The truth is far more sinister, and I'm afraid if anyone finds out I know. The entry ended abruptly. Ulysses flipped through the next few pages, but they had been torn out. His hands trembled, not from the cold now, but from the weight of what he'd discovered. This wasn't just a diary. It was evidence of a crime that had gone unpunished for years. Looking up from the diary, he noticed a sleek black car passing by for the third time that morning. The driver was watching him intently. Ulysses quickly tucked the diary into his coat. After decades of living on the streets, he'd developed a sixth sense for danger, and right now, every instinct was telling him to move. Gathering his few possessions, Ulysses stood up, his joints protesting against the cold. He needed to find somewhere safe to read the rest of the diary. More importantly, he needed to figure out what to do with the information he now possessed. Because somewhere out there, Eva Richardson had written these words, and Ulysses couldn't shake the feeling that she might be in danger. Or worse. The black car passed by again, moving slower this time. Ulysses merged into the morning crowd of office workers, the diary pressed against his chest like a shield. He had spent years trying to remain invisible on these streets. Now, for the first time in a long while, he had a purpose. But first, he needed to survive the day. Ulysses found refuge in the public library, his old sanctuary from the cold. The familiar smell of books and the quiet atmosphere helped calm his nerves. Finding a secluded corner behind the reference section, he pulled out the diary again, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he opened it to where he had left off. The next legible entry was dated August 1980, and the handwriting was noticeably more hurried. The board meeting today was a disaster. Henry presented doctored financial reports. I'm sure of it now. He knows I've been investigating. Marcus, our head of security, pulled me aside afterward. He said he's noticed unusual activities in the building at night. Security cameras mysteriously shutting off, files being moved. I don't know if I can trust him, but I'm running out of allies. Samuel from accounting approached me too. Poor man looked terrified, kept looking over his shoulder as he handed me an envelope. Inside were copies of transactions, proof of money being funneled through shell companies. He's been gathering evidence for months. Your father trusted me, he said. I couldn't let this continue. I have to be careful with this information. If Henry discovers what I know... Ulysses paused his reading as a group of businessmen walked past his corner. One of them wore a suit that probably cost more than Ulysses had seen in years. He shrank further into his corner, making himself invisible, a skill he'd perfected over his years on the streets. The next few entries detailed Eva's careful gathering of evidence. She wrote about late nights in the office, secretly photographing documents, and building a case against Henry and his conspirators. But there was something else in her words, a growing paranoia, the feeling of being watched. September 12th, 1980. Daniel, my driver for the past 5 years, didn't show up for work today. When I called his home, his wife was hysterical. He never came home last night. The police say there's no evidence of foul play, but I know better. Daniel knew too much. He'd seen Henry meeting with strange men late at night in the parking garage. He'd told me about suspicious packages being exchanged. I've started keeping this diary in a different location every night. Trust is a luxury I can no longer afford. As Ulysses read on, the story grew darker. Eva wrote about mysterious accidents befalling employees who asked too many questions. The company's security team had been gradually replaced with men who answered only to Henry. The board members, who had once been her father's friends, now avoided eye contact in hallways. October 3rd, 1980. I've made copies of everything. All the evidence is secured in multiple locations. If anything happens to me, the truth won't die with me. I've written letters, prepared documents. Henry might have the board under his thumb, but he doesn't know everything. Richard from the mailroom is the only one I trust now. He's been helping me track the paper trail. We've discovered that the embezzlement goes beyond Richardson Enterprises. Henry's been using the company to launder money for some very dangerous people. The deeper we dig, the more horrifying it becomes. Today I found an old photograph in Father's study. It was taken at a company picnic in 1977, everyone smiling. Henry standing right beside Father. They looked like best friends. How long had Henry been betraying him? Had Father discovered the truth before he died? The official report said heart attack, but now I wonder... The library had grown quieter, the afternoon light casting long shadows through the high windows. Ulysses was so engrossed in the diary that he almost missed the sound of footsteps approaching his corner. Looking up, he saw a man in a dark suit pretending to browse the shelves nearby. Something about his stance seemed wrong, too rigid, too alert. Carefully, Ulysses slipped the diary back into his coat and gathered his few belongings. As he stood up, he caught a glimpse of another suited man at the end of the aisle. These weren't regular library patrons. They moved with too much purpose, their eyes scanning the room with professional precision. Using the techniques that had kept him alive on the streets, Ulysses made his way through the library's back sections. He knew every exit, every hiding spot. The homeless weren't always welcome in public spaces, so he'd learned to move unseen when necessary. He slipped out through a service entrance, just as he heard voices asking the librarian about an older homeless man. His heart pounding, Ulysses merged into the afternoon crowd on State Street. The diary felt heavy against his chest. its secrets now his burden to bear. Finding a quiet alley, he pulled out the final pages he hadn't yet read. Eva's last entry was dated October 15th, 1980. If you're reading this, I need your help. Everything has been arranged. The evidence is hidden where only the right person would think to look. Someone who knows the truth about second chances and lost dreams. Someone who understands that sometimes the most valuable things are found in the most unexpected places. I've hidden it where the stories never end, where knowledge meets mercy, where the past and present converge. If you're reading my words, you might be the one I've been waiting for. Henry thinks he's won, but he doesn't understand. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones society has forgotten to see. Time is running out. I have one last meeting tonight. If I don't return, the entry ended there. The remaining pages were blank, leaving Ulysses with more questions than answers. But something about Eva's final words resonated with him. Where the stories never end, where knowledge meets mercy. His eyes widened as realization struck. He knew exactly where Eva had hidden the evidence. The answer had been in front of him all along, in the very place he'd spent so many days seeking shelter from the world. But now he noticed something else. A small piece of paper tucked into the diary's binding, so well hidden he'd almost missed it. As he carefully extracted it, his hands shook. It was a photograph, yellowed with age, showing a young woman, Eva, standing in front of Richardson Enterprises, but it was the background that caught his attention. In the window's reflection, barely visible, was a scene that made his blood run cold. Ulysses quickly tucked the photo away as he heard footsteps approaching the alley. He needed to move, needed to think. Eva had left him a trail to follow, but he wasn't the only one looking for answers. The men in suits proved that someone else knew about the diary, and they were getting closer. As he merged back into the crowd, Ulysses felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. After years of trying to forget his past, of drowning his own failures in anonymity, he had stumbled upon someone else's struggle for justice. The question was, did he have the courage to do something about it? The answer would have to wait. Right now, he needed to survive long enough to uncover the truth, because somewhere in this city, Eva Richardson's story was waiting to be told, and Ulysses might be the only person left who could tell it. The old abandoned bookstore where Ulysses had found the diary seemed different now as he cautiously approached it that evening. The 80s-era neon signs from neighboring businesses cast multicolored shadows across its dusty windows. He needed to think, to piece together the clues Eva had left behind. The photograph he'd found troubled him deeply. In the reflection of the window behind Eva, he'd seen Henry Blackwood in what appeared to be a heated argument with Eva's father, Richard Richardson. The date stamp on the photo was just 3 days before the elder Richardson's death. As he settled into his usual corner, Ulysses pulled out the diary again, searching for any details he might have missed. A small business card fell from between its pages. Helen Morrison, Richardson Enterprises and Head of Human Resources, 1979. The card was weathered, but on the back was a handwritten note. Eva, remember the summer program. Some dreams don't die, they just wait for the right moment. Helen. The message triggered something in Ulysses's memory. Before his life had fallen apart, when he was still teaching high school English, he'd participated in a summer education program sponsored by Richardson Enterprises. It was 1979, and he'd met Helen Morrison there. She had been kind, passionate about helping young people from underprivileged backgrounds. He remembered something else. Eva had visited one of his classes during that program. She'd been different from what he expected of a wealthy heiress, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his students, discussing The Great Gatsby with genuine enthusiasm. The irony of that memory, given his current situation, wasn't lost on him. Turning back to the diary, he found an entry he'd overlooked. July 25th, 1980. Helen came to my office today. She's been going through old personnel files and found something strange. Several employees who questioned company practices over the past 5 years have vanished from our records completely. No termination notices, no resignation letters, just gone. She showed me a pattern. Each disappeared shortly after meeting with Henry. My father's personal driver, Marcus Wells, was the first. He vanished in 1975, just after father started looking troubled about company finances. The official story was that he'd moved to Florida, but Helen discovered his social security number has shown no activity since then. I remember Marcus. He used to sneak me candy when I visited father at work. He had 3 children, a wife. People don't just vanish without a trace. Helen suggested I look into the summer education program files. She says there's something there I need to see, but she's afraid to tell me directly. She's been acting strangely lately, jumping at shadows. Yesterday she gave me a key and told me to remember room 437. I don't know what that means, but I'm holding on to the key. Ulysses's hands trembled. Room 437. He knew that room. It was where he'd taught his summer classes in the Richardson building, but why would Helen point Eva there? And why had Eva mentioned it in her final entry about hiding evidence? A sound from the street made him look up. The black car was back, moving slowly past the bookstore. This time it stopped. 2 men got out, their movements deliberate, professional. They were the same men from the library. Ulysses quickly gathered his belongings, but as he reached for his blanket, something caught his eye. Behind the radiator where he usually slept was a small envelope, yellowed with age. Heart pounding, he grabbed it just as the bell above the bookstore's door chimed. The men were inside, moving silently. Ulysses slipped behind the old checkout counter. Years of living rough had taught him how to move without sound, how to become invisible when necessary. He heard their footsteps, their quiet conversation. The old man has to be around here somewhere. The diary was found in this area. Keep looking. Mr. Blackwood wants that diary found tonight. Ulysses held his breath. Through a crack in the counter, he could see their expensive shoes moving between the dusty shelves. They were methodical, professional, and getting closer. Then he saw something else. Under the counter, hidden behind years of cobwebs, was a small door, probably once used for storing cash boxes. It was barely big enough for a person, but Ulysses was thin from years of poor nutrition. As the footsteps grew closer, he made his decision. The door creaked slightly as he pulled it open, making the men pause. "Did you hear that?" Ulysses slipped inside just as their flashlight beams swept the counter area. The space was cramped, dusty, but it had something else, a small passage leading to what must have been the building's old delivery entrance. As he crawled through the passage, he could hear them searching the counter area. The envelope he'd grabbed was still clutched in his hand, along with the diary. Whatever was in that envelope, and they couldn't find it. The passage ended at a metal grate leading to an alley. Ulysses pushed it open as quietly as possible and emerged into the cold night air. He could still hear the men searching inside, but they were looking in the wrong place now. Under a street lamp, he quickly opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a memo from 1975, detailing the transfer of Marcus Wells to a non-existent branch office. But it was the signature at the bottom that made Ulysses's heart stop. Not Henry Blackwood's, but Helen Morrison's. The pieces were starting to come together, but they formed a picture more complex than he'd imagined. Helen Morrison wasn't just a witness, she was involved somehow. But was she Eva's ally or enemy? And what was in room 437 that was so important? Ulysses looked up at the night sky, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. He knew what he had to do next, but it would mean breaking into the Richardson building, a heavily secured corporate office. For a homeless man, it was practically suicide. But as he clutched Eva's diary, he thought about Marcus Wells's children growing up without answers, about Eva's final plea for help, about Helen Morrison's cryptic warning. He thought about his own fall from grace, how one mistake had cost him everything. Maybe this was his chance for redemption. In the distance, he could hear sirens, a common sound in 1980s Chicago. But tonight they carried a different meaning. Something was stirring in the city's corporate underbelly, and somehow a homeless ex-teacher had become the key to exposing it all. Ulysses began walking toward the financial district, where the Richardson building's windows still glowed in the night sky. Whatever was in room 437, he had to find it before Henry Blackwood's men found him. The diary's weight in his coat pocket reminded him of what was at stake. Somewhere in this city, Eva Richardson's fate remained unknown, and the truth about her disappearance lay hidden in a trail of breadcrumbs she'd left behind. Ulysses just hoped he'd live long enough to follow them to their end. The Richardson building loomed before Ulysses, its granite facade illuminated by the city's lights. In 1985, security systems weren't what they would become. No keycards, no biometric scanners, just traditional locks and security guards. Still, breaking in wouldn't be easy. But Ulysses had an advantage: invisibility. The homeless were truly invisible in the corporate world of the 1980s. He'd watched this building for years, seeking shelter in its shadow. He knew the patterns of the security guards, the timing of the cleaning crews, the ways of the late-night workers. He also knew something else, something from his summer teaching days. The building's service entrance had a broken door that the maintenance staff propped open with a brick while smoking. Even 5 years later, some habits hadn't changed. As he approached the service entrance, Ulysses thought about Eva's diary entries. September 5th, 1980. The cleaning crew found something strange today. Old maintenance logs in the basement, showing regular late-night elevator activity to floors that were supposed to be empty. The logs were signed by Samuel from accounting. When I asked him about it, he turned pale and said he'd never worked late nights. Someone's been using his ID after hours. But why? And how did they get access to it? The service door was indeed propped open. Just as he remembered, Ulysses slipped inside, his heart pounding. The service corridors were dimly lit, smelling of industrial cleaner and cigarette smoke. A radio played somewhere distant, "Take On Me" by a-ha, one of 1985's biggest hits. He made his way to the service elevator, remembering the building's layout from his teaching days. Room 437 was on the 4th floor, in what used to be the education department. But as he reached for the elevator button, he heard voices approaching. Yeah, Blackwood's got everyone looking for some old diary, real hush-hush stuff. What's so important about some diary? Don't know, don't care. Long as the overtime pays. Ulysses quickly ducked behind a large trash bin. 2 security guards passed, their flashlight beams sweeping the corridor. Once they were gone, he pressed the elevator button. The ancient machinery groaned to life. Inside the elevator, he found another surprise, a building directory from 1980, yellowed but still legible. The education department was listed on the 4th floor, but there was something odd. Room 437 was marked as storage, authorized personnel only. When the elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, Ulysses moved silently through the darkened hallway. The floor was different from what he remembered. No more cheerful educational posters or student artwork. Now it was all corporate sterility, the dreams of helping underprivileged students long forgotten. Room 437's door looked ordinary enough, but the lock was new, much newer than the others. Ulysses pulled out Helen's key, his hands trembling slightly. It fit perfectly. Inside, the room was empty except for rows of filing cabinets, but something was wrong. The room's dimensions were off. Ulysses had taught here for an entire summer. He knew it should be larger. Running his hands along the back wall, he found what he was looking for. A slight seam where the wall didn't quite meet the floor. The false wall swung open easily, revealing a hidden office space behind it. The office was like a time capsule from 1980. Papers were scattered across a desk, a coffee cup still half full, now crusted with 5-year-old coffee. On the wall was a calendar stopped at October 1980, the month Eva disappeared. Looking for something? The voice made Ulysses freeze. He turned slowly to find Helen Morrison standing in the doorway, looking older than he remembered but still carrying herself with the same dignified posture. She held a small revolver, pointed steadily at his chest. "Helen," he said softly, "you remember me? Ulysses Matthews from the summer program?" Her eyes widened slightly. "The English teacher? The one who—" She lowered the gun slightly. "What are you doing here?" "I found Eva's diary," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "She mentioned you, Helen. She trusted you. What happened?" Helen's hand trembled. "You don't understand. None of us understood until it was too late." She closed the door behind her. Eva discovered something bigger than embezzlement. Henry wasn't just stealing money. He was using Richardson Enterprises to launder money for organized crime. Mr. Richardson found out, threatened to expose everything. Then he had his heart attack. And Eva, she was smart. Too smart. She figured it all out, started gathering evidence. But she knew they were watching her, so she split up the evidence. The diary was just part of it. Helen moved to the desk, pulled open a drawer. The rest is here, all the proof, everything they did. Eva hid it where she knew only someone from the education program would think to look. Why didn't you come forward? Helen's laugh was bitter. I tried. The police were paid off. The FBI was too busy with bigger cases. And then Eva disappeared. She pulled out a thick envelope. I've been protecting this for 5 years, waiting for the right person to find it. Maybe it's fitting it's you, someone who has nothing left to lose. Suddenly, there were voices in the hallway. Helen's eyes widened in fear. They followed you, she whispered. No, Ulysses realized with growing horror. They followed you. The doorknob began to turn. Helen shoved the envelope into Ulysses' hands and pushed him toward a window. The fire escape, she hissed. Gus, this is your chance to make it right, to make everything right. Helen, come with me. She shook her head, raising her gun toward the door. Someone has to give you time. Now go. As Ulysses slipped out onto the fire escape, he heard the door burst open. Helen's voice rang out clear and defiant. Hello, Henry, I've been expecting you. A gunshot shattered the night air. Ulysses clutched the envelope to his chest as he descended the fire escape, his heart pounding. The diary had led him to the truth, but now that truth was stained with blood. He thought of Eva's final diary entry, her hope that the right person would find her message. As he reached the ground, he heard more shouts from above. They would be coming for him now. But he had what Eva and Helen had died protecting, the evidence that could bring down Henry Blackwood and his criminal empire. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Ulysses melted into the shadows of the city he knew so well, the envelope and diary secure inside his coat. The night wasn't over yet, and he still had one more place to go, somewhere even Henry Blackwood wouldn't think to look, because Eva's diary had one more secret to reveal, one final piece of the puzzle that would change everything, and Ulysses was finally ready to learn the truth, no matter the cost. The autumn wind whipped through Chicago's streets as Ulysses hurried through the pre-dawn darkness. Helen's death weighed heavily on his mind, but he couldn't stop now. The envelope she'd given him contained documentation of every illegal transaction Henry Blackwood had orchestrated, including proof of his connection to the organized crime families he'd been working with. But it was the last page of Eva's diary that consumed his thoughts. He'd found it hidden in a secret compartment in the diary's binding, missed during his initial reading, October 16th, 1980, final entry. If you're reading this, I may already be gone. But there's one last piece to this puzzle, something even Henry doesn't know about. I've hidden a safety deposit box key at the place where I first learned about the power of words, where stories saved my life. Mr. Matthews, if you're reading this, remember our discussions about Gatsby, about second chances. The key is where we sat that day, talking about dreams. The box contains everything, recordings of Henry's meetings, photographs, bank statements. But, more importantly, it contains the truth about my father's death. Henry thinks he destroyed all the evidence, but he didn't know about the camera in father's office pen. I have it all on film. I'm meeting Henry tonight. He thinks I'm coming to negotiate, but I'm going to confront him with what I know. It's dangerous, but I have to try. If something happens to me, find Samuel from accounting. He knows where to take the evidence. To whoever finds this, I'm trusting you with the truth. Please don't let them bury it. Ulysses's hands trembled as he read. He remembered that summer day in 1979 perfectly now. He and Eva had sat on the old stone bench behind the library, discussing Gatsby's green light and the corruption of the American dream. She'd been so passionate about literature, so different from what he'd expected of a wealthy heiress. The library was still dark when he arrived, but he knew exactly where to look. The stone bench was still there, weathered by time and elements. Running his fingers along its base, he found it, a loose stone concealing a small cavity. Inside was a safety deposit box key wrapped in a newspaper clipping from 1980. The clipping was about Eva's disappearance. The official story claimed she'd embezzled money and fled the country. There was a quote from Henry Blackwood, expressing his deep disappointment in his former protégé. But there was something else in the article that caught Ulysses's eye. A mention of Samuel Parker, the accountant who'd helped Eva gather evidence. According to the article, he'd died in a car accident 2 days after Eva's disappearance. A sound behind him made Ulysses turn sharply. A figure emerged from the shadows, an elderly man in a janitor's uniform. "Been waiting a long time for someone to find that key," the man said softly. Ulysses tensed, ready to run, but something in the man's voice made him pause. The janitor stepped closer, and Ulysses gasped in recognition. "Samuel," the man nodded. "Had to disappear after what happened to Eva. The janitor's uniform makes you invisible. You know all about that, don't you, Mr. Matthews?" "But the newspaper said, Henry's people control the media. Easier to say I died than explain why an accountant suddenly vanished." Samuel looked over his shoulder nervously. Eva knew they were coming for her that night. She gave me instructions, told me to wait, to watch for someone who'd understand the diary's message. "What happened to her, Samuel?" The old accountant's eyes filled with tears. She confronted Henry with the evidence. "I was there, hiding in the storage closet next to his office. She had him cornered, had proof of everything. But then—" He paused, his voice breaking. "Then Richard showed up. Richard, the mailroom clerk she trusted." Samuel laughed bitterly. Richard was Henry's man all along. He'd been watching Eva for months, reporting everything back. They took her somewhere, I don't know where. I ran that night, changed my identity. Been working here ever since, waiting. A police siren wailed in the distance, making both men jump. Samuel grabbed Ulysses's arm. "The safety deposit box is at First Chicago Bank, downtown branch. Everything Eva gathered is there. But be careful. Henry's got people everywhere. Take this." He pressed a small key into Ulysses's hand. "My locker in the janitor's room. There's a uniform inside. You'll need it to move unseen." "Come with me," Ulysses urged. But Samuel shook his head. "Too risky. Besides, someone needs to stay here, keep watch. Eva believed in second chances, Mr. Matthews. She saw something in you during that summer program. Something special. Don't let her down." As Ulysses changed into the janitor's uniform in the dark locker room, his mind raced with possibilities. The bank wouldn't open for hours, but he couldn't go back to his usual spots. Henry's men would be looking there. Checking his pockets, he found he still had the photo from the diary, the one showing Eva's father arguing with Henry. Looking at it more closely now, he noticed something in the background he'd missed before. Richard, the mailroom clerk, watching the argument with an oddly intense expression. But there was something else about Richard that nagged at Ulysses's memory. Something from the summer program. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Through the locker room's frosted window, he could see multiple shadows moving. Samuel's voice drifted through the door, casual but clearly alarmed. "Gentlemen, library doesn't open for another 3 hours." A gruff voice responded. "We're looking for a homeless man. Tall, older, might have come this way." "Haven't seen anyone," Samuel replied, "but I'll keep an eye out." The footsteps moved away, but Ulysses knew they'd be back. He had to get to the bank, had to uncover the final piece of this puzzle. Eva had trusted him with her story, and now Helen had died protecting it. As he slipped out of the locker room, now anonymous in his janitor's uniform, Ulysses made a silent promise to Eva, to Helen, to Samuel, and to himself. The truth wouldn't stay buried any longer. Henry Blackwood's reckoning was coming, but first, he had to survive until the bank opened, carrying evidence that powerful men would kill to protect. And somewhere in the city, Richard, the betrayer, was surely looking for him too. The dawn was breaking over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It would be the longest morning of Ulysses's life, and he couldn't help but wonder if it might also be his last. The morning sun cast long shadows across Chicago's financial district as Ulysses approached First Chicago Bank in his borrowed janitor's uniform. The city was coming alive, early workers hurrying past with their briefcases and cups of coffee, none sparing a glance for another maintenance worker. He'd spent the last few hours moving through the city, using every trick he'd learned on the streets to stay ahead of Henry's men. The evidence from Helen was secure in his uniform's inner pocket, along with Eva's diary. The safety deposit box key felt heavy in his hand. As he waited for the bank to open, Ulysses's mind returned to that detail about Richard that had been nagging at him. Then it hit him during the summer program. He'd seen Richard before, but not as a mailroom clerk. He'd been wearing a suit, talking with Henry Blackwood outside the building. At the time, Ulysses hadn't thought anything of it. But now, the bank's doors opened precisely at 9:09 a.m. Ulysses waited until several customers had entered before following, keeping his head down, pushing his cleaning cart ahead of him. The janitor's uniform was a perfect disguise. Bank employees nodded politely before looking right through him. At the safety deposit box area, he encountered his first challenge. The attendant was a young woman with a suspicious eye. Can I help you?" Ulysses pulled out the key Eva had hidden. "Need to access a box. It's my aunt's. I have the paperwork here." He produced the documentation Samuel had given him, praying it would hold up. The attendant examined the papers carefully. "Eva Richardson. Yes, I remember when she opened this box. Strange that she never came back for it." She looked up at Ulysses. "So you don't look much like her." "Different fathers," Ulysses said smoothly, drawing on his years of teaching improvisation to theatre students. "She always said I got the short end of the genetic stick." The attendant laughed, and the tension broke. Minutes later, Ulysses was alone in the viewing room with Eva's safety deposit box. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a manila envelope and a small leather case. The envelope contained what he expected: documents, photographs, bank statements. But it was the leather case that made his breath catch. Inside was a pen, an expensive-looking fountain pen with the Richardson Company logo. Eva's final diary entry had mentioned a camera in her father's pen. This had to be it. Also in the box was a letter, dated October 16th, 1980. "To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, you followed my trail and found the truth." The pen contains a micro camera, cutting-edge technology father used to record important meetings. He never trusted Henry, even at the end. The final recording shows their last meeting. Henry admitted everything: the money laundering, the connections to organized crime, back is all of it. Father threatened to expose him. 3 days later, my father was dead, but Henry made a mistake. He didn't know about mother's heart condition, didn't know father had started taking her medication after his first heart scare. The heart attack was induced by an overdose of mother's pills. Henry's men must have switched father's medication. I have proof of all of it. The question is, what will you do with it, Eva? Ulysses carefully packed everything back into the box, his mind racing. He needed to find a way to view that pen's recording, but first he had to get out of the bank safely. Through the viewing room's window, he could see more customers arriving. Then he saw him, Richard, walking through the bank's front door in an expensive suit. He was talking to the security guard, showing him a photograph. The guard nodded and began scanning the lobby. Ulysses quickly closed the safety deposit box and slipped the contents into his uniform. He had seconds at most before they started checking the viewing rooms, but as he reached for the door, he heard familiar voices in the hallway. "Check every room," Richard was saying. "He has to be here somewhere." Ulysses looked around desperately. The viewing room was small, with nowhere to hide except... He looked up at the ceiling's acoustic tiles. In his youth, he'd done maintenance work during summer breaks from college. He knew these old buildings, knew how they were constructed. Within seconds, he had pushed aside a ceiling tile and pulled himself up into the crawl space. He carefully replaced the tile just as the door opened below. "Empty," Richard's voice said. "Check the next one." Ulysses began crawling through the ceiling space, using the grid of metal supports to distribute his weight. He could hear movement below as Richard's men searched room after room. Then he heard something that made him freeze. Richard was on his phone. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood, we're searching now. No sign of him yet, but..." "What? Are you sure? The old library." A pause. "I understand. We'll head there right away." Ulysses's heart stopped. Samuel. They must have figured out his connection. Below, he could hear Richard organizing his men, dividing them between continuing the bank search and heading to the library. Ulysses knew he had to make a choice: escape with the evidence, or try to warn Samuel. The answer came to him instantly. He hadn't saved Helen, but he wasn't going to let another person die protecting Eva's truth. Using the building's blueprints he'd memorized from the maintenance office's wall, Ulysses navigated through the ceiling towards the bank's rear service entrance. He could hear confusion below as Richard's men continued their search. Finally, above the service corridor, Ulysses found what he was looking for, a ventilation duct leading to the alley behind the bank. It would be a tight fit, but he'd lost weight during his years on the street. As he emerged into the alley, he heard sirens in the distance. Richard's men would be heading to the library now. Ulysses broke into a run, his janitor's uniform flapping in the wind. He had the evidence that could bring down Henry Blackwood. He had proof of murder, corruption, and organized crime. The smart play would be to take it straight to the authorities, but Samuel had been watching that bench for 5 years, waiting for someone to find Eva's message. He'd protected her secret all this time. Ulysses couldn't abandon him now. As he ran through Chicago's streets, the morning sun at his back, Ulysses thought about Eva's words about second chances. Maybe this was his. A chance to be the hero he'd failed to be in his own life. The library was 4 blocks away. He just hoped he wasn't too late. The morning light streamed through the library's high windows as Ulysses burst through the service entrance. The building was still closed to the public, but he could hear voices echoing through the empty halls. "Where is he, old man?" Richard's voice carried clearly. "Oh, we know you've been helping him." Ulysses crept closer, his heart pounding. Through the doorway of the reading room, he could see Samuel backed against the reference desk, facing Richard and 2 other men in expensive suits. Despite his fear, the old accountant stood tall. "I've spent 5 years pretending to be dead," Samuel said, his voice steady. "You think I'm afraid of you now?" Richard pulled out a small revolver. "Last chance. Where's the evidence?" Ulysses looked around desperately. He had to do something, but what? Then he saw it. The old library's pneumatic message system, still used occasionally to send books between floors, a relic of the 1960s that most people forgot existed. Making his decision, Ulysses pulled Eva's diary from his pocket and quickly scrawled a note on its last page. He wrapped the diary and Helen's envelope together and slipped them into the pneumatic tube, sending them to the basement archives. Then he took the pen camera from his pocket and stepped into view. "Looking for this," he called out. Richard spun around, his gun shifting to target Ulysses. "Mr. Matthews, you've led us on quite a chase." 5 years, Ulysses said, holding up the pen. 5 years you've been sitting pretty, thinking you destroyed all the evidence. But you missed this. Mr. Richardson's pen camera. Eva found it, didn't she? That's why she had to die. Richard's face twisted. Eva was naive, just like her father. They thought they could change things, make the world better. He laughed bitterly. "You know what happens to people like that? They end up dead in the Chicago River." "So you did kill her." "She left us no choice, just like you're leaving us no choice now." Richard gestured to his men. "Check him. Find the rest of the evidence." But before they could move, the library's front doors burst open. A squad of police officers poured in, led by a familiar face, the young attendant from the bank. "Chicago PD, drop your weapons." Richard's gun swung toward the officers, but he never got a shot off. The library erupted in chaos as police tackled Richard and his men. In the confusion, Ulysses saw Samuel slip away through a side door. Later, sitting in a police interview room, Ulysses learned the truth. The bank attendant was an undercover officer, part of a task force that had been building a case against Henry Blackwood for years. They'd been monitoring the safety deposit box, waiting for someone to claim it. "Eva Richardson came to us before she disappeared," the detective explained. "She knew she was in danger, but she didn't have enough proof yet. She set up this whole trail, hoping someone would find it and finish what she started." "Did you ever find her body?" Ulysses asked quietly. The detective shook his head. "The case is still open, but with Richard's confession and the evidence you found, we've finally got what we need. Henry Blackwood was arrested an hour ago." In the days that followed, the story exploded across Chicago. Henry Blackwood's empire crumbled as the evidence came to light. The pen camera's recording proved he'd ordered Mr. Richardson's murder. Richard turned state's evidence, revealing the full extent of the corruption. A week later, Ulysses stood in the preserved crime scene of Eva's office, now reopened for the investigation. Everything was exactly as she'd left it that October night in 1980. Her coffee cup still sat on the desk, a lipstick stain on its rim. "She'd be proud of you," a voice said behind him. It was Samuel, looking more relaxed than Ulysses had ever seen him. "You did what she hoped someone would do." "We never found her," Ulysses said softly. Samuel smiled mysteriously. "Maybe that's because there's nothing to find." Ulysses turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Eva was smarter than all of them. She knew they were coming that night, the Eva they chased to the river. That was all part of her plan. Samuel pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This came for you yesterday." Inside was a postcard from Buenos Aires, unsigned, but the handwriting was unmistakable, the same flowing script from the diary. On the back was a simple message: "Some dreams don't die, they just wait for the right moment. Thank you for believing in second chances." Ulysses felt tears in his eyes. All this time, she'd been alive, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. "What will you do now?" Samuel asked. Ulysses looked around the office, at the educational program posters still hanging on the walls. I think it's time to go back to teaching. The Richardson estate is being turned into a charitable foundation. They're reopening the summer program." Samuel nodded approvingly. "Second chances all around, then." As they left the office, Ulysses took one last look at Eva's coffee cup. He thought about paths not taken, about mistakes and redemption, about a diary that had changed everything. Outside, Chicago streets were coming alive with the evening rush. Somewhere in Buenos Aires, a woman was reading about Henry Blackwood's arrest in the international papers, and here, a former homeless man was getting ready to return to the classroom, carrying with him a story about courage, justice, and the power of second chances. The diary had found its way to exactly the right person, just as Eva had hoped it would. And in saving her truth, Ulysses had saved himself. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt